Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Tuesday, June 27th, 2023. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. Putin vows to uphold deal with the Wagner group. So, Russian President Vladimir Putin on Monday night delivered his first address to Russia since Wagner chief Yevgeny Prigozhin's short lived uprising ended on Saturday. And Putin vowed to the mercenary fighters that he would uphold his side of the deal that was reached to end the mutiny. So, Putin thanked Russian citizens and his security forces for opposing the mutiny. Putin said, quote, a firm, unambiguous position in support of the constitutional order was taken by public organizations, religious denominations, leading political parties, in fact, the entire Russian society. Everyone was united and rallied by the main thing, responsibility for the fate of the fatherland, end quote. So Putin did not mention Prigozhin by name, saying only that the organizers of the rebellion had betrayed their country. The Russian leader said that Ukraine and its Western backers wanted to see Russians kill each other and for the country to plunge into civil war. Putin said, quote, they wanted Russian soldiers to kill each other so that military personnel and civilians would die, so that in the end, Russia would lose and our society would split, choke in bloody civil strife. They rubbed their hands, dreaming of taking revenge for their failures at the front and during the so-called counteroffensive, but they miscalculated, end quote. So discussing the Wagner members, Putin said that the overwhelming majority of the fighters and commanders of the mercenary force are Russian patriots. He said, quote, therefore, from the very beginning of the events, on my direct instructions, steps were taken to avoid a lot of bloodshed, end quote. Putin thanked Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko for mediating negotiations to end the crisis that led to a deal. Putin vowed to uphold the agreement by offering Wagner members the options of signing contracts with the Russian Defense Ministry or going home or traveling to Belarus. He said the promises that he made will be fulfilled. So the exact details of this Lukashenko brokered agreement are not clear. The Kremlin initially said that Wagner fighters who did not take part in the mutiny could sign contracts with the defense ministry. But Putin's comments on Monday night sort of suggested that all members of the mercenary force, even if they did take part, have that option. But again, it's not entirely clear. So the Kremlin has said that Prigozhin will go to Belarus under the agreement. So Prigozhin on Monday, he released an 11-minute audio recording on his Telegram channel, but his whereabouts at this point are not known. In the recording, Prigozhin defended his actions, claiming that he was not trying to overthrow the government. He said that his motive was to prevent the destruction of Wagner, saying that the private military company would cease to exist by July 1st due to the Russian Defense Ministry's demand to have all volunteer fighters sign contracts. He said that a Russian missile strike killed 30 Wagner fighters sparked the march into Russia, but his claim that the Russian military targeted his fighters has not been confirmed. They only put out a video that didn't, I don't even think the video showed any dead bodies or anything. Again, it's just not, that claim isn't confirmed. So according to Russian media, multiple reports have said that Prigozhin's fighters shot down a Russian helicopter and airplane during the mutiny, killing 20 Russian airmen. But the figures have not been confirmed as the Russian Defense Ministry has not published an official death toll. But Putin, during his address, he acknowledged that there were Russian casualties. He said, quote, the courage and self-sacrifice of the fallen heroic pilots kept Russia safe from tragic, destructive consequences, end quote. And Prigozhin also acknowledged that his fighters did fire on Russian aircraft. He said, quote, we regret that we had to strike at aviation, but they hurled bombs and launched missile strikes at us, end quote. So after launching the insurrection on Friday, the Wagner fighters captured a military base in the city of Rostov-on-Don and were headed toward Moscow on Saturday before turning around after Prigozhin agreed to back down. So Prigozhin said in this Telegram recording, quote, "Our decision to turn around was based on two important factors. The first factor is that we did not want to shed Russian blood. The second factor is that we were registering our protest and not seeking to overthrow the government of the country. At this time, Lukashenko extended his hand and offered to find solutions for the further work of the Wagner PMC within a legal jurisdiction," end quote. So it's not clear to me is if these mercenary fighters, if they go to Belarus, if they're going there in the capacity, as the Wagner group, as this mercenary force, or if they just get to go there and, live in exile. I've seen some reports. I know there's some reports floating around that say, they're worried that the Wagner group is going to build up a presence in Belarus, but I don't know if that's confirmed. I'm not really sure what the situation is there. Again, there's still just a lot of details not clear about this agreement that they worked out. I'm sure, more. It's going to become more clear, in the next few days and coming weeks. All right, the next one here. Russia is investigating if the West played a role in Prigozhin mutiny. So Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said Monday that Russian security services were investigating whether or not Western or Ukrainian intelligence agencies played a role in Yevgeny Prigozhin's two-day mutiny. When asked by RT if Russia had evidence of Western involvement, Lavrov said, quote, "I work in a government ministry that is not engaged in gathering evidence of unlawful acts being committed, but we do have such agencies, and I assure you that they are looking into it," end quote. The Russian diplomat said that Western intelligence likely wanted the mutiny to succeed, and he pointed to U.S. media reports that said U.S. intelligence knew Prigozhin was planning armed action against the Russian military establishment, but did not make the information public. Lavrov said, quote, "In particular, CNN reported that the U.S. intelligence services knew for several days that a mutiny was in the works, but decided to disclose that information to anyone. Decided not to disclose that information to anyone, apparently in the hope that the mutiny would succeed," end quote. So Lavrov pointed to another CNN report that said U.S. officials expected Prigozhin to face more resistance and for the insurrection to be more violent. So there was a U.S. official speaking to CNN who said that they assessed the situation would get a lot more violent and bloody. And you have to think that's probably what the U.S. Wanted to happen. Lavrov also told RT that the U.S. signaled to Russia that it was not involved in Prigozhin's uprising, a message that was delivered by U.S. Ambassador to Russia Lynn Tracy. And then later on Monday, President Biden denied that the U.S. played any role in the crisis and said that Washington had made that clear to Moscow. So Biden also denied that the U.S.'s NATO allies were involved in the uprising. He said, quote, "They agree with me that we had to make sure we gave Putin no excuse to blame this on the West, to blame this on NATO. We made clear that we were not involved, that we had nothing to do with it. This was part of a struggle within the Russian system," end quote. And so far, Russia says that they're investigating it. They're saying that the U.S. and the West likely wanted to take advantage of it, but they're not, outright accusing them of being involved. So that's the situation there. And discussing Ukraine's response to the mutiny, Lavrov said that Kiev hoped the government in Moscow would have been brought down. This reminds me, back in May, the Washington Post reported that Prigozhin was in contact with Ukrainian military intelligence and even offered them Russian troop positions in exchange for a Ukrainian withdrawal from Bakhmut. If you remember that report, I covered it on this show here. So that report was based on U.S. intelligence assessments that leaked on Discord, although the full documents were not published. So we don't really know what the whole story is with that. And Prigozhin also denied those accusations. But it's definitely something to think about, in the wake of this insurrection that he launched. All right, the next one here. This is from Kyle Anzalone over at the Libertarian Institute. And this is NATO's response. The NATO chief says that the Wagner insurrection shows weakness and fragility inside Russia. Secretary General of NATO told reporters that the Prigozhin's rebellion late last week demonstrated that Putin's hold on power was slipping The remarks came as U.S. officials say the threat presented by Prigozhin may be ongoing, and that's referring to Blinken saying the other day that we haven't seen the final act. Very ominous comments that Blinken made on Sunday. So Jens Stoltenberg made the comments while attending a press conference in Lithuania. He said, quote, "I think what we're seeing in Russia over the last few days demonstrates the fragility of the Russian regime. And of course, it is a demonstration of weakness. We see the weakness of the Russian regime, and it also demonstrates how difficult and dangerous it is for President Putin," end quote. So, it sounds like kind of gloating almost from Stoltenberg. So, how do you expect Russia to take these public comments? Again, Blinken saying, "Oh, we don't think it's over," and then Stoltenberg, saying all this about Putin being weak. All right, the next one here. U.S. official says that Ukraine has lost 15% of its Bradley fighting vehicles. So this, a U.S. military official told us to the New York Times that they lost these Bradley fighting vehicles during the counteroffensive. The article detailed how Ukraine was struggling to make gains in its counteroffensive that was launched about 3 weeks ago due to heavy minefields that were laid by Russian forces and other stiff resistance. So the report reads that the fierce resistance has taken a toll on Ukraine's weaponry. The United States committed 113 Bradley fighting vehicles to Ukraine. At least 17 of them, more than 15%, have been damaged or destroyed in the fighting so far, according to this U.S. official. The U.S. announced a new $325 million weapons package for Ukraine earlier this month that included 15 Bradley vehicles to replace ones that were damaged or destroyed in the first few days of the counteroffensive. And Ukraine has also been losing German-made Leopard tanks and is seeking more from Berlin. On Tuesday, I think we're expecting to see a new military aid package from the U.S. for Ukraine. And, they got that extra $6.2 billion they could work with now. And I think that's going to also include Bradleys and other armored vehicles. So the New York Times report also quoted an unnamed senior Biden administration official who said that Ukraine's struggles in the counteroffensive have been sobering for the U.S. And the official said that they're behind schedule. This is kind of the rhetoric you see from the West, from the U.S. and other Western officials. We had that other report last week that said the counteroffensive is not meeting expectations. It's kind of this implied thing that they're not doing as much as the U.S. and the West want. They want them to be, putting more, inflicting more pain on Russia and making advances. But instead, just lots of people are dying. So Zelensky said last week that the counteroffensive was going slower than desired, but vowed that his troops will fight on. So while acknowledging that the counteroffensive has not gone well for Ukraine so far, U.S. and Ukrainian officials have stressed that the assault is only in its initial stages and that significant advances could still be made. But we do know leading up to the counteroffensive, thanks to the Discord leaks and media reports around the time, before this offensive was launched, that there was a lot of doubt on the U.S. side that the Biden administration was actually preparing for the event of this counteroffensive failing. So knowing that, they still push for it and have rejected the idea of ceasefire or peace talks. All right, the next one here. Lavrov says claims that Russia plans an attack on the nuclear power plant are nonsense. So this is Sergei Lavrov again. He said on Monday that Ukrainian allegations about Russia planning an attack on the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant are utter nonsense. So last week, Zelensky claimed that Russia was planning a terrorist attack on the ZNPP, which has been controlled by Russian forces since March 2022. So Zelensky's claiming that Russia plans to blow up this nuclear plant that Russia controls for some reason. I don't know what Russia would have to gain from that at all. But Ukraine has actually previously launched attacks on the ZNPP in an effort to regain control of the plant. So I just wanted to remind people of this. So there was a report from the Times of London back in April that said Ukrainian special forces soldiers launched an attack on the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant from the north bank of the Dnieper River, attempting to cross the water to the south bank, which is where the plant is located. So the assault failed as the Ukrainian soldiers could not cross the river due to heavy Russian fire. But what this report said is that the U.S. backed this attack on the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, which is Europe's largest nuclear power plant. The Ukrainians used the HIMARS rocket launchers, the US made HIMARS rocket launchers, to hit Russian positions on the south bank of the river. And a Pentagon source told the Times that the US provided time sensitive intelligence to Ukrainian special forces during this assault. So the US was giving them, coordinates, it sounds like, to launch these strikes near this nuclear power plant. So it's important to keep that in mind because around that time, the power plant was being shelled a lot or areas around it. And Ukraine was blaming Russia, even though Russia controlled the plant. So here we have Zelensky saying Russia's planning to blow it up. Who knows what that means. But amid these Ukrainian allegations that Russia is plotting this attack, Senator Lindsey Graham and Richard Blumenthal, they introduced legislation on Friday related to potential attacks on nuclear facilities. Their bill would declare that Russia's use of tactical nuclear weapons or the destruction of a nuclear facility that dispersed radioactive contaminants into NATO territory would trigger NATO's Article 5, which outlines the alliance's mutual defense commitment. So they want us to commit to going to war if this plant does blow up. No matter who does it, they're gonna blame it on Russia no matter what. Lindsey Graham especially. So it's definitely concerning what's going on with these accusations that are flying around. All right, the next one here. Denmark says that it's starting training Ukrainian pilots on F-16s. So Denmark's government has said that Copenhagen has started a training program for Ukrainian pilots on US-made F-16s. So Troels Lund Poulsen, who's Denmark's acting defense minister, said that his country has, quote, taken the steps of starting a training and further education effort for the Ukrainian pilots, end quote. So it sounds like it's either started already or it's just about to start based on his quote. So he also announced that Denmark was pushing up its plans to retire its F-16s by 2 years. So Denmark has a plan to phase out its F-16s and replace them with F-35s. Initially, they're going to do it by 2027. Now they're going to do it by 2025. And this means that they could have F-16s to send Ukraine, pretty soon. So Denmark is expected to provide Ukraine with F-16s, but they have not made a final decision. Denmark's defense minister added that Ukrainian pilots will need to train on F-16s for 6 to 8 months before the American jets can be provided. So that's the timeline that Denmark is putting on it, 6 to 8 months. That's been a big question mark of how long the training program would be. So yeah, that's the situation. We'll see, if we see reports of them actually, Ukrainian pilots in Denmark doing the training, whether it's, classroom stuff or if they're actually flying the planes. All right. So the next one here, Blinken backs Biden calling Xi a dictator. So Secretary of State Antony Blinken on Sunday defended President Biden calling Chinese President Xi Jinping a dictator. Biden referred to Xi as a dictator just one day after Blinken met with the Chinese leader as part of a trip to Beijing to smooth relations. China was furious over Biden's remark and lodged a formal complaint with the U.S. ambassador in Beijing. Blinken said, quote, when it comes to China, we are going to do and say things that they don't like, end quote. And he said this on CNN's State of the Union on Sunday. He also made similar comments in an interview with CBS. So when asked if Biden was wrong to call Xi a dictator, that was his response. And Blinken also said that China will continue to do and say things that the U.S. doesn't like. And he pointed to the rhetoric from the Chinese Foreign Ministry. Now, I read the Chinese Foreign Ministry's daily press briefings pretty often, and they do, harshly criticize U.S. policy toward China, but you don't see them, throw out personal insults like Biden did. And when it comes to Xi, I mean, he very rarely criticizes the U.S. by name. He kind of makes vague things saying, certain countries want to contain China. Recently, he mentioned the U.S. by name, and that was kind of, it was notable that he did. But, when you have Biden constantly criticizing China, and in this case, the president. So it just goes to show the diplomacy here. So when asked if he believes Xi is a dictator, Blinken said, quote, the president speaks clearly. He speaks candidly. I have worked for him for more than 20 years, and he speaks for all of us, end quote. So really doubling down on that remark. And I think it just goes to show that we're not going to see much progress, real progress here between this administration and China. The next one here, this is another one from Kyle over at the Libertarian Institute. Germany announces troop buildup in Lithuania. So this is all part of NATO's plans to build up on what they call NATO's eastern flank. So Germany's defense minister announced that Berlin is preparing to move thousands of troops into Lithuania. The announcement comes as Berlin and Vilnius engage in joint war games about 100 miles from the Russian border. So on Monday, the German defense minister said that 4,000 German troops will be deployed to Lithuania after facilities are built to accommodate them. And they're saying that they're going to permanently station these 4,000 troops there and that they expect these facilities to be completed in several months. So sounds like pretty soon Berlin is going to be sending these few thousand troops to Lithuania. They currently have about 1,400 troops in Lithuania. So it'll be more than doubling their military presence in the country, which borders Russia. All right. What the next one here? UN investigator says that Gitmo detainees faced inhuman treatment. So the first UN investigator allowed inside the notorious U.S. prison at Guantanamo Bay said that the 30 remaining detainees in the facility are facing ongoing, cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment under international law. So this is a UN special rapporteur that, again, this is the first time that the U.S. let a UN official into Gitmo, the notorious torture prison. So this official said that there have been significant improvements at Gitmo since, the torture at the prison was exposed. But she said that the 30 men who remain are living with their past experiences. So this is Fionola Ni Ilan. I probably butchered her name. She's an Irish human rights lawyer. She said, quote, "I observed that after 2 decades of custody, the suffering of those detained is profound, and it's ongoing. Every single detainee I met with lives with unrelenting harms that follow from systematic practices of rendition, torture, and arbitrary detention. Past experiences of torture live with them in the present without any obvious end in sight, including because they have not received any adequate torture rehabilitation to date." End quote. I mean, she's saying, they were tortured in these facilities and they're still there. And they're also facing other harsh treatment, including constant surveillance, forced removal from their cells, and the unjust use of restraints. So she made several recommendations, including the shuttering of the facility. She said they should close it down. She said the U.S. government must apologize for torturing the detainees and provide reparations. She said, quote, "The U.S. government must urgently provide judicial resolution, apology, and guarantees of non-repetition," end quote. So she came out with this report and had this press briefing on Monday, which marked the UN's observance of the International Day in support of victims of torture. So it's this day that the UN recognizes for people that are tortured. And the U.S. State Department issued a statement that said the U.S., condemns torture and all that. And then I just noted another example of the U.S., involved with torture, that, the Biden administration is still seeking the extradition of Julian Assange, the WikiLeaks founder, because he exposed U.S. war crimes. That's why they want his extradition and they want to lock him away for his entire life. So while Assange has been held in London's Belmarsh prison on no charges since April 2019, and a guy named Nils Melzer, who is a Swiss professor academic who served as a UN special rapporteur on torture from 2016 to 2022, he determined that Assange's treatment amounts to prolonged psychological torture while he was a UN special rapporteur for torture, and he wrote a book about it. So go check that out. I linked to the book in this article here. The Trial of Julian Assange, A Story of Persecution. So give that a read if you haven't. Or you could just search his name, Nils Melzer, and Assange, and you could read, articles that he's written on it. So the last news story here is cool. Antiwar.com has received a journalism award We have received the Serena Shim Award for Uncompromised Integrity in Journalism. The award is given to non-mainstream journalists who continue to tell challenging truths in difficult times. So, as explained at the Serena Shim Award website, the award is named after the courageous Lebanese American journalist from Detroit who reported how Turkey and the West were training and arming extremist fighters who were entering Syria hidden in aid trucks. And in October 2014, she died in southern Turkey under suspicious circumstances. She was only 29 years old when she died. In giving the award, the organizers noted that the anti-war team publishes news, reports, analysis, radio interviews, and videos. They are consistently reliable and accurate from Yugoslavia in the 1990s to Ukraine today. Antiwar.com is a vital voice seeking truth and clarity in the fog of war and propaganda. So that's very nice, and we really appreciate it. And just speaking of antiwar.com, so Tuesday marks the 4th anniversary of Justin Raimondo's death, and Justin was a co-founder of antiwar.com in 1995, along with Eric Garris, who still runs the site today, who is my boss. And Justin was such a good writer. You know, he was a real genius, and you could go look back at his columns. But we have, an obituary here for him if you want to read about his life, if you're not familiar with him. And besides, his archive at antiwar.com, his 2 main books that I have here, Reclaiming the American Right, which is a great history of, the old right in the United States and its anti-war origins. And it's also, I believe it was written in like 1993, or maybe it was later than that, but it's one of the first original histories of the neocons. He traces the neocons back from when they first, came about, I think in the 40s and 50s. I haven't read it. I read it about around the time he died. I read it about 4 years ago. And also his biography of Murray Rothbard, who was the great libertarian economist who's friends with Justin and Eric. They were involved in activism with him. So he lived a very interesting life, and he wrote a lot of really good stuff for antiwar.com. So go check that out if you're not familiar with him. And our viewpoints, we have a lot of good ones, as always. One from Rick Sterling, a pretty thorough analysis about Jake Sullivan. Who is National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, the man running U.S. foreign policy? One from Ted Galen Carpenter, Washington's resurgent military presence in the Philippines provokes China. One from Colonel Douglas McGregor at the American Conservative, Democratic backsliding, Washington policies accelerate decline. One from Mitchell Plitnick, the Abraham Accords are starting to fall apart. That's over at Mondo Weiss. And the spotlight is from John Kiriakou, the godfather of whistleblowers at Consortium News, about Daniel Ellsberg, another friend of Justin's and Eric's. But that's it. That's everything for today. Go check out the blog. We have good stuff in there. The Ron Paul Liberty Report that we repost, Conflicts of Interest, Kyle Anzalone's great show. So yeah, always lots of stuff to check out at antiwar.com, even if you listen to this show. But that's it. You could always support us at antiwar.com/donate, like and subscribe on YouTube or Odyssey, Rumble, wherever you watch the video. All that stuff helps out. Keep commenting, keep telling me your theories about the, Wagner uprising in Russia. But that's it. I'll be back tomorrow with some more news. Thanks for listening.